Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our, pardon me, information from our Supervisor of Elections. Before I turn the meeting over to him, I do want to tell you that we have added the use of the technology feature closed captioning. It is up to you to enable that feature. So if you want it or need it, it is most likely under the More button on your device, be it a laptop, a phone, or a tablet of some sort. We will continue to use this to be inclusive with people with other needs than some of us have. The meeting is also being recorded. Now it is the traditional lunchtime. So if you're chomping on your sandwich and you'd prefer to be off camera, feel free to stop your video. I recommend that we all mute ourselves so that background noise does not interfere with today's presentation. Okay, I got muted, not unmuted. Okay, so the laws have changed, and here to tell us very specifically where we stand with our laws regarding voting in 2022 is our Supervisor of Elections, Ron Turner. Every county has their own Supervisor of Elections, and quite frankly, I think we are very fortunate to have Ron Turner as our Supervisor of Election. He and his staff, with the help of volunteers, do a marvelous job for we, the people, we, the voters. So I, without further ado, turn the program over. But one moment, sorry. We will have time for questions and answers at the end of the program. If you're concerned you'll forget, feel free to pop it into the chat at any time. And I look forward to being with you for the information from Ron Turner. And please, sir, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Linda, and good to see everyone this afternoon. Can you hear me? Well, yeah, you can. I see shaking heads and a lot of familiar faces that I know well in the audience. So I always feel like these Zoom presentations or meetings are a little bit like the Brady Bunch for those of us who've been around a day or two. So I can see Marcia and Greg shaking their heads here, nodding. So that's always a good sign when we do this. So it's great to be back with you again. I've spoken with the league virtually and in person over the years, many times, have a lot of good friends in the league. You have a great leadership here from Linda. I've known Pat Price for a week or two. I see her in the audience. So it's good to be with you. And so we have a lot going on right now. And so let's just talk about some things with what is occurring with the primary election first. We are in the middle of the election. Election day itself is August 23rd, but that is not the election. The election begins before election day and continues after the day of the election. And we have already started many of the activities for this election. Vote by mail ballots began going out to military and overseas voters 45 days before the election, as always. And then domestic vote by mail ballots begin being mailed 40 days prior to an election. So we've already had those out for a few weeks now. We've mailed more than 120,000 vote by mail ballots in this election, which is a significant number of ballots for a primary election. Obviously, we still have a number of vote by mail requests that were held over from the presidential election cycle. Vote by mail ballots may be requested for up to 2 years or an election cycle, or for one specific election, if someone needs a ballot just for one election. And so most of our requests are on file now for vote by mail through the end of this year, December 31st, 2022. And when those drop off, we will be mailing a notice to those individuals to ask them if they would like to renew their vote by mail request. So we'll do that at the end of this. So more than 120,000 out. More than, I believe it's about 25,000 that are back. I think we got about another 3,000 in the mail today that we're processing. So we are processing those ballots as they come back through the mail, and they come back in person to us in elections offices. Then early voting begins on August the 13th. That continues through the 21st. So that's 9 days of early voting. We will have early voting daily from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. At 6 sites in Sarasota County. So those will be at North Sarasota Library, the Terrace Building in downtown Sarasota, Fruitville Library for those voters who are out east, at the Devon Event Center. In the past, we've had Sarasota Square Mall. The mall has been very gracious with us for many years now, working with us. However, we are moving that location to the Devon Event Center, which is on 41 nearby. So we will be doing that for both the primary and the general election, as opposed to the mall. We will have the R.L. Anderson building for early voting for this election, and the Supervisor of Elections office in Biscayne Plaza in Northport. So those are the 6 sites that we will have. And then election day, we will have all of our polling locations open on election day. The only change with polling locations really for this election will be, in the past, for 2 of our precincts, we use the municipal auditorium in the city of Sarasota. And those 2 precincts, the polling location for those 2 precincts will be McCowan Towers in the Rosemary District, because we had a request from the residents of the Rosemary District to move those precincts into the Rosemary District. So they wouldn't have a need to cross 41 there through traffic and construction and things. So we have accommodated that, and voters will receive more than one notice to that effect. We've mailed new voter information cards to every voter in Sarasota County. Just a few weeks ago, you should have received yours. If you are not a vote by mail voter, you would have received a sample ballot in the mail for the primary election also. We only mailed those 2 voters who do not have a vote by mail request on file. Why is that? Well, we mail the vote by mail ballots prior to the sample ballots going out in the mail. So it wouldn't do any good to mail a sample ballot to vote by mail voters. And we time our sample ballots so those go out about 10 days to 2 weeks before early voting, because we want voters to have that information when they need that information, as opposed to having it too early so they may misplace that sample ballot. So we've sent that out. So we have already begun opening and processing and tabulating vote by mail ballots that are coming back to us. That's an ongoing process that will continue through election day. That's one of the great things about the state of Florida, is that we are able to process our vote by mail ballots in advance of election day. And with the volume that we have, we need all the time we can get to do that and to keep those organized. We check, of course, every signature on every ballot envelope to verify the authenticity of the on the voter certificate. We also do not forward vote by mail ballots. That is another security feature. So if a voter is not going to be at the address that they have given to us in their voter record, we mail them a ballot. That ballot could potentially come back to us. They're not forwardable by the U.S. Postal Service. Those ballots will come back to us. And again, that's a security feature. So voters, if they're going to be at another address, would need to tell us that. And And most voters do that. And we work with the voters to make sure that they get their ballots at the address that they need them, because as we know, we have many part-time residents whose permanent residence is Sarasota, but they may have homes at another location. So we work with voters to do that. Early voting, I mentioned the locations and sites for the primary election, that the 6 sites, 8 hours a day. For the general election in November, we're going to actually have 9 sites. So it will be the most early voting sites that we've had in Sarasota County. We will be adding a new early voting site in November in Venice, because we've always had the R.L. Anderson building in Venice where I have an office. And that is one of our busiest locations in the county for voting in person on election day or early voting. We're going to add an additional early voting site in Venice at the library on the island of Venice. So that way we can certainly take some of that kind of, I don't know, burden, if you will, or stress at the R.L. Anderson building and share that with the other location in Venice and provide another opportunity for our voters there. So we will have for the general election 2 sites in Northport, 2 sites in Venice, 2 sites in Sarasota, North County. Then we'll have the Devon Event Center, Fruitville Library, and Bee Ridge Park. So we've tried to spread those out geographically and with the municipalities to have at least kind of 2 sites there at those locations for voters in November. Those sites will be open for 14 days going through the Sunday before the election. I think, as many of you know, starting in 2020, we added the optional Sunday before Election Day for early voting. That is up to the Supervisor of Elections in each county, whether they choose to do that or not. We did not do that prior to 2020, but I want to make sure that we give every opportunity in early voting for people to be able to use all of those opportunities to vote. For those who haven't voted early, I typically choose early voting. It's pretty easy and convenient for anyone. I voted by mail in 2020, like many of you, but I suspect I'll be voting early for this primary coming up. I can't make it to my polling place on election day. I'm a little busy, and it's a little far away from my office here in the terrace building, which I'm sitting in here now on the 7th floor. But early voting gives voters that in-person voting experience, because a lot of people like to go in, check in. They show us their photo and signature identification. We issue them a paper ballot, and they use the same tabulators that they're using on election day in the polling locations. So it's very much like voting on election day. It just provides voters a lot more convenience and flexibilities, because they can pick the location and the date and time that works for them. So I certainly encourage voters to think about early voting, because it's almost like a hybrid between the convenience of vote by mail and the in-person voting experience of election day. So the state of Florida, again, provides 3 ways to vote in each election, and it's certainly up to the voter to choose which method works best for the voter themselves, and which is most convenient, which they feel the most comfortable with. And we encourage them just to make sure to get out and vote. So one of the things that was talked about that I was asked to address was certainly changes in voting laws. And for the most part, as far as the voter is concerned, I don't think most of the voters are going to notice much of a change when they go to cast their ballots. Where we've seen some changes are when a voter makes a vote by mail request, a voter will need to provide their driver, in addition to their name and their date of birth, which we've had in the past. They'll also need to provide a driver license number, or the last 4 of the Social Security number, or their Florida identification card number. We will use that for verification purposes. So that is a newer law in Florida. Most voters have those numbers in their files, and the voters that did not have those numbers, we mailed a notice to them and asked them to provide us that information on the front end for their voter record. So we would have those numbers in their file for comparison purposes. And I can tell you that we had a great response from voters in Sarasota County, very, very responsive. I think the majority of people that we sent that notice to asking for that information provided it to us. So that's a great thing. The other thing is secure ballot intake stations. The container that we use to collect the return of vote by mail ballots in person is now called a secure ballot intake station. Other than that, you're really not going to notice that much difference. They are inside our offices. They are staffed by 2 elections officials that are there with those containers. They're standing adjacent to them, reminding voters to have signed their voter certificate before they return their ballot to us, answering any questions from voters, but they're in-person monitoring. In 2020, we had staff monitoring those containers back then. So the real difference was just a name change from drop box to intake station. And so that was the major change with those. We never had those containers as 24-hour-a-day receptacles for voters. And I made that choice back in 2020 because I take the security of elections seriously, and I wanted to make sure that I could guarantee that we were personally overseeing the return of the ballots through those containers. So what we did in 2020 is pretty much the same that we're doing this year, which is the intake stations are containers on rollers or casters, and we roll them out. We, during our business hours and during early voting hours, a voter drops off their ballot. And then at the end of the day, we're going to log all of those ballots and keep a chain of custody of them. And so it's pretty much the same process that we have then. Again, it's not really something that the voter, I don't think, would notice a lot different. As far as returning a ballot in person, a voter may return his or her ballot, individual ballot. They may return a ballot for a family member. There's a long list of immediate family members under the law. And then they may return 2 other ballots other than his or her own ballot or a ballot for an immediate family member. And to return other ballots would be a felony. Now that is a new law under Florida statutes as far as the felony provision. And what we have done is provide notices to voters up at those secure ballot intake stations to remind them of what Florida law says about the return of those ballots. So those are major ones. We also get questions about the elections crime unit, which was a new law that was enacted. The legislature gave the Secretary of State authority to create an elections crime unit, which is an investigative unit in the Florida Division of Elections. Pete Antonacci, who was the appointed supervisor of elections in Broward County, that did not run for supervisor of elections, but was appointed after the supervisor in the 2018 election was removed from office. Pete, who's an attorney, he's done various things, was appointed to that position. As far as I know, that's the only staff that they have right now, or that they've notified us that they have in that unit. He is the director. I do know Pete because he was a supervisor of elections during my time as a supervisor, so I have worked with him. But where that unit goes is to be seen. But I just wanted to give you an update on where that is and what that means at this point. And so I think at this point, it would probably be best to just kind of maybe answer questions or maybe have a conversation, and that would prompt me actually a little bit more, Linda, to for the conversation. So
thank you, Ron. Thank you very much. I do want to remind everyone that when Ron says that he has 2 staff members at the intake stations, they truly are there to be helpful. They are not going, so if you have questions, because we want our ballots to count. Before I get into some other specific questions and we ask Elena to go through the chats, I do want to ask you, Ron, to make mention, if you're willing, about those that are on our primary ballot that are really universal races.
All right, right. Okay, so that's a good thing to talk about. So it's an interesting primary ballot this year. Probably the longest. There's probably more on the primary ballot for this midterm primary election than I've seen in my career in Sarasota County. So I think, as all of you know, we have closed primaries in Florida. The primary is always the most difficult election to communicate to voters about because there are different types of races and contests going on this August 23rd ballot. So first, you have a closed primary where the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are nominating their candidates to face off in November, right? So for example, County Commission District 2, if you live in County Commission District 2, which is a single member district, you have a Democratic primary for Democratic voters only. It only appears on Democratic ballots in that district. Republican primary for Republican voters only in that. And then they're going to nominate a Democrat and a Republican there to face off. So those are the closed primaries, right? There are others, but that's one example. Then you've got something called a universal primary contest. And that is if candidates running for office are all of the same political party, then, and they're not facing anyone potentially in November from the other major party, then that primary election is called a universal contest and is basically an open primary, or in essence becomes a general election for that office. There are several of those this time, one being State Senate District 22, which is 2 Republican candidates. There were no other candidates for that. So every voter in Sarasota County, every registered voter can vote in that universal primary contest. Hospital Board this time has multiple universal primary contests. Hospital Board candidates do run in partisan races for the Hospital Board. It's the way that it's set up under the law. And but this time they are universal primary contests for all of them except for one Hospital Board race, which will be on the ballot in November. But the remainder of the races for Hospital Board are on this ballot. So you have the closed primary I mentioned, then you have the universal primary contest, then you have nonpartisan contests, and that's school board. So school board, you have 3 school board races, districts 1, 4, and 5. They are different than the county commission because they are countywide elections. So the district number just denotes where that school board representative lives in the county, what district. But every voter in Sarasota County gets to vote in all 3 of those school board races, 1, 4, and 5. So that said, there are literally hundreds of ballot styles in Sarasota County. So every precinct is essentially going to have a Republican ballot, a Democratic ballot, and a nonpartisan ballot. And it's going to be kind of assigned based on where a voter lives and their party affiliation. So there is literally something for everyone, regardless of voter registration, to vote on in this primary. And State Senate District 22, many of the Hospital Board races and all of the school board races will be finished in August. Those are not going to the November general election ballot. So again, this essentially becomes the general election for those offices. So it's important for everyone to vote in this primary. Did that answer that, Linda?
It answered it beautifully, Ron. Thank you so very much. because so many people are confused.
I need a whiteboard to bring it out to sketch out how that all works in the primary. Every other election is fairly straightforward, but the primaries just seem to, we get a lot of questions every single day about the primary election. And then with the universal primary contest, because we have to put the party on the ballot, because the law tells us, state law and Florida Administrative Code, how to lay out the ballot and what's on there. Ron doesn't get to decide that. I have to follow specific rules and guidelines. And so with the universal primary contest, like for State Senate District 22 or Hospital Board, you're going to see REP, REP, REP. So you'll have a nonpartisan vote, someone that's registered without party affiliation, or say a libertarian, who's going to get a nonpartisan ballot in the mail. And then they're going to ask, why are all these Republicans on my ballot? So
Yes.
that has been a ongoing theme of questions every day of my life now until we get through this.
Yes, I am getting those questions from the public as well, not just from league members.
No, to the no party affiliation voters or people who aren't Democrats or Republicans who are getting that nonpartisan ballot, what I want to say is, hey, be thankful, because you have more to vote on as someone without party affiliation than you have ever had to vote on in a primary election in Sarasota County. So you should really be grateful that you're seeing all these REPs. But I know it,
It's so very true. And it's important that all of us tell our friends, our family, this vote counts. It is important to participate. Don't sit back waiting for it to reappear in November, because it won't.
No,
These
it's done.
races are done. They are official. The people we vote for will be elected or not. So it's very, very important that we participate.
No, it is. I mean, every election's important, and certainly this primary election, as I said, it's a lengthy ballot. There's a lot on here, and I know there's a lot of interest in this various races. Hospital board, for instance, there was a Washington Post story about our little Sarasota hospital board here over the weekend. We've had the same thing with our school board kind of races and conversations. So these are important races. Many people are interested in them. Rightfully so, but those primary elections, very important, and I wish there was an easier way to explain it to people, and we do, as we you mentioned, Linda, when I talked about the staff that we have in helping voters, we are here to help everyone, and anyone that's interacted with us knows that we have a customer focused approach. Our customers are voters or the league or whomever, and we treat everyone with dignity and respect. And as I joke, sometimes we use cold compresses, warm compresses for voters, and then we hold their hand and gently walk them across the finish line. So we're here to help voters make sure that every eligible voter and every eligible ballot counts in each and every election, and that's what we do. We take great.
Can I ask a question on the same topic regarding closing the an opener versus closed? Isn't it even easier for it to become closed? For instance, can't a write-in candidate put a name in with that? Does he even have to have a party affiliation to close?
A write-in candidate can close, but that did not occur in these elections.
But for education purposes, he does not even have to indicate a party?
No, write-in candidate could close. You're right. And a write-in candidate of whatever could close that down in half. In these instances, that did not occur, and so it allows that universal primary. But yes, you're correct, and because write-in candidates only appear on the general election ballot, and you'll notice you'll only see write-in lines on certain races. That is because, as Ann is mentioning, a write-in candidate actually has to qualify for office. So, say for governor, if we have a write-in candidate, I can't tell you who the write-in candidate is because the law does not allow me to utter their name. However, they need to campaign and tell folks. But all those Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse or whatever is the new thing, Snooty the Manatee names that go on there. Tom Cruise, Ron Turner got one for US Senate once. You know, it was probably my mother, although she's not a voter in Sarasota County. It doesn't count because I wasn't an official write-in candidate. So we have to cull through all of those cute little names to find the official ones. But Ann is correct in what she said.
Thank you for that, Ron. And Anne, thank you for asking. I do want to make mention that in addition to voting, we encourage voters to know about the candidates, to be informed voters. And to that end, you can use the League's national website, vote411.org, or if you just put in vote 411, it'll go there. Now, with these phone calls I've had from people, we don't always hear it the way it's intended. So it's vote, and then it's the number 4 and the digit 1, 1. And I did put it in the chat for anyone who's not familiar. Many, if not most, of our local candidates are on there. They put their own information up. We do not meddle with it in any way, shape, or form. And it keeps changing because I got notification that a candidate just put their information on earlier today. So you can go to Vote 411 multiple times so that you're informed. And now, Elena, if you would visit our chat, because I know you've put in the first couple, and help to share the questions with Ron, please.
All right, the first question is this: is notifying voters that they need to renew their vote by mail status a new procedure? And is it required across the state, or does the Sarasota Supervisor of Election choose to do this? You had mentioned that early on in your talk.
It's not required, and it's something I choose to do. So it's something that we have to take the time and budget for that expense to be able to do that. So that is not something that is required. It's not something new for us. I've been doing it since I've been Supervisor of Elections. My predecessor did that, so it is not a new thing. The only new part of that would be the volume that we're dealing with today, but otherwise, no. But it's up to the individual counties, and depending on what their needs are and maybe what their resources are in that county.
Well, on behalf of the citizens and voters here, thank you very much. I think we all appreciate that. All right, next question. Who gets to decide how many early voting sites are available? Is that also the individual Supervisor of Election that does that?
Yes. What the law says is we have a minimum number of days and hours that we can provide, which is 8 days, 8 hours a day during a certain time frame before the election for early voting. We can have up to 14 days, 12 hours a day. As I said, we will have 9 days, 8 hours a day for the primary, because that's based on need and turnout, 6 sites. Then the general, obviously the turnout's larger, so we'll have more sites, and those will be for 14 days, which is the full run. We'll do 10 hours a day. I'm not doing 12 hours because our staff is already going to be there for 12 hours. So if you do 12-hour days for 14 days, now you're there for 14 or 15 hours. And it's tough because they're already working, you know, round the clock here. But it's up to the individual SOE. Now, the law only allows us to use certain sites, types of sites for early voting locations. For instance, elections offices, governmental, public libraries, certain types of governmental buildings and things. You do have a wild card under the law where if there's not a location that you can use that fall in the category, the list of types of buildings, like a government-owned kind of convention center or something like that, then you can use another location. And that's what we do for the Devon. That's going to be our wild card. But other than that, we're using libraries or offices. Bee Ridge Park is a county-owned facility, so it has to fit within that framework.
Okay, thank you. Another question, is there a limit on the number of vote by mail ballots a voter can return for family members on the approved list?
No, there's a, you know, that's why the number is variable that can be returned. Good question, Margaret Bryant, who is, I see Margaret sometimes, so good to see Margaret. And no, I mean, it can vary because the list is, you know, it could be a spouse, could be some type of in-law, grandchildren. So it just kind of varies based on the voter. That's why we're putting a large enough notice up next to our secure ballot intake stations to try to help guide that for voters, that they should be following this framework for returning them. But that can vary by person depending on their family and their circumstances, right?
Okay. Thank you. Here's a question. Oh, I see Linda has her hand up, so I guess we'll defer to that first.
Thank you for that, because related to what was just covered is the fact that many residents, voting residents here, do not have family members. And thereby that would fit into the 2 ballots to non-family members. So if you have a friend or non-relative, you know, a fellow person at your church that suddenly becomes unable to take their ballot in, you could do that, right, Ron?
You could do two others besides that list of family members or your own ballot. Yeah.
Yep. So it's important that we be open to helping others as we would want to be helped, because life happens when you're making other
And that's
plans.
why the law allows those 2 others potentially, because someone may need some assistance. You know, certainly you can return it by mail, that's an option. But if a voter wants a different option to return in person, then it does give some variation there on that to provide some opportunity, but also some kind of safeguard and guardrails at the same time. So there's some balance in that.
Oh, another quick one. How often can you do that?
Good question, Ann. Moving on. If you came back in every day and we're doing that, then I might have to start asking some questions.
Yes.
Right. So
Becomes
I would
suspicious.
appreciate people, you know, I mean, I think the intent is per election, I think, but it doesn't say that specifically. But, you know, obviously I have some obligation there to try to maintain the integrity of the election. So I'm trying to balance, you know, accessibility and fairness in all of this. So please help me with that. But thanks, Ann. Good question. Ann has all the best questions today, so I'm
Thank
keeping
you.
my eye on Ann over here. So.
Thank you. All right, next question from Barbara. Can you comment on who are the allowed observers, not the election officials, to either early voting or election day voting, and what they are allowed to do? So there are observers and
All right, so if you're talking about poll watchers are appointed by political parties or campaigns to be inside early voting locations or election day polling locations. I believe we will probably have about, between the 2 parties for early voting, I know of right now, because they've already appointed their poll watchers for early voting, both the Democratic Party and Republican Party, probably about 150 or more between the 2. And then my guess is it could be more for election day. Now, how that works, so those individuals are appointed by their parties. Those lists are sent to the Supervisor of Elections, and then I have to sign off on those. I'm not judging any of those people. The only thing that I look for my staff is that the individual is a voter of Sarasota County, because that's required. Once we do that, then we approve those list of poll watchers and we send them a badge that you will see. It's like 3x5 or something like that, 4x6, that they will have to wear. They are not allowed to speak to voters inside polling locations or early voting sites or up to 150 feet outside of those locations. If they're there to observe the process. And if they have questions, they can interact with the site manager or the clerk, whoever is in charge at that location for election day. But that's been something consistent under Florida law. It's been something that's been used for years, but you will see them. The other thing you will notice is when you see their kind of tags, you will notice that they were like yellow or lime green or orange or something. We will not point out, there will be nothing on the tag that says what campaign, what party. We don't do that. Now that's a Ron Turner thing. It's not something required by law. Some counties do that, but I don't think it's appropriate to point out who they represent there, because that creates a whole nother potential host of issues for that person or for us. So it just makes sense to keep it anonymous. We know what that color means. And so what that means is you can only have one of those people representing that entity there at a time. So you can only have 2 yellow badges or 2, it's almost like granimals. You can have 2 zebras or 2 giraffes or whatever it is. We know the system, we know who it is. But we don't certainly want to, especially in this day and time, point anything out to people. They have a right to be there. They're going to do their jobs. We're going to do our jobs. If they have questions, believe me, they will ask the staff. If they don't feel comfortable with that, I can tell you both parties know the bat phone number to get to me, the red phone with a cake top that you get. They both know and will call me if they see something they have a question about. And believe me, it happens every election, but that's how that process works.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Margaret. Can you please briefly describe what is happening right now with the vote by mail ballots you have received, and what, in other words, what the process is?
Well, Margaret, good question as always. Margaret's one of my favorites. I see her all the time. So what happens with vote by mail? All right, so you return your vote by mail ballot by mail, or you return it to a secure ballot intake station, or as we call them, SBIS, SBIS for short, because it's a mouthful, right? Secure ballot intake station. You return that, and so it usually takes us a couple days, maybe 3 days, hopefully shorter, to process that. So what happens with that is several different things. One, we're checking the signature on every one of those ballots to compare it to your signature on record. So it's always important to keep your signature updated. If there is a signature issue where we don't think it matches, or if it's unsigned, we're going to contact the voter to try to give the voter a chance to cure that. That's a very small number of ballots, like maybe 150 right now out of, tens of thousands. So, but we're gonna try to contact those voters, and we're gonna work on that. Then what happens is we're gonna organize those ballots and sort them by party and by precinct. And why is that important? Well, we have to do audits for each election, post-election audits, and we also have to do, you remember 2018, the same midterm election, and what happened after the general election? We had 3 statewide, it's the R word, I'm not going to say it because it's like Beetlejuice and you say it too many times and it happens. But it's for state recounts, say once. So that potential. So we have to organize by party and precinct, because if it's not countywide and we have to find a specific county commission district or whatever, we need to know where those ballots are at. And we have to be able to easily identify them. So we have to organize all of this on the front end. And then what's going to happen is, so there's a canvassing board for each election. So a county canvassing board is made up of the county judge, the supervisor of elections, and a county commissioner or an alternate for the county commissioner or substitute if a county commissioner cannot serve. And the 3 of us have public meetings, and we typically have at least 1, if not more, observers there at the meeting watching us during this public meeting. And so what happens, and it's already began, is the canvassing board meets, and tells the staff, once we've gotten a certain number of vote, not a certain number, but once we've gotten to a date where we've got a good amount of vote by mail ballots that we've already processed, checked the signatures, done all of what I just said, they say, okay, Supervisor of Election Staff, you can begin opening those ballots. But one member of the canvassing board has to stay and watch that proceedings. That usually ends up being me because it's in the building where I'm at, and it's just more convenient for me. So what happens is we have teams of Democrats and Republicans, et cetera, that are paired up, and they begin a process in an open room, that kind of a bit large room, where they're going to start opening those vote by mail ballots. And then once we do that, then those vote by mail ballots, typically the next day, are going to be run through high-speed scanners that will begin the tabulation process. It does not give us any results at this point. We will not have those vote by mail results until after 7 p.m. on election day. But it does allow us to get ahead of this volume of that. And that's just a wash, rinse, repeat thing. So this week on Thursday, again, we're going to begin opening ballots. And then the next day we'll run them through the tabulators, and I will be in the room pretty much in 2020 for the general election. I was there, witnessed the opening and tabulation of, I believe, every single vote by mail ballot that happened in the county. So it's an interesting process. It's pretty well thought out. There's a lot of chain of custody, and I don't leave the room for a lunch break or anything with these teams. What we do is split them up. So half the room gets a lunch break, the other half gets a room, but they keep working, because I don't take a lunch break or anything for that, because those ballots have to stay in my custody. And it's like trying to shut down a nuclear sub if I walk out of the room. So because at the end of the day, those are all secured in locked cages with tamper-resistant seals with logs that I sign off on, and until I open them back up again, they just have to stay in the canvassing board custody at that point. So it's a pretty detailed process.
And in that process, Ron, you also do post online that a voter's ballot has been received.
So there's two ways you can do that, Linda. You can look online, you can track your ballot, Sarasota Votes, that's VOTES.gov. We're the only .gov site. I say that because there's other similar sites to ours, but with similar names. But we're the only Sarasota Votes.gov, G-O-V, government, not .com, a commercial site. We have government URL. So you go there, you can track your vote by mail ballot. It'll tell you information like when we mailed it, when you returned it, the ballot's been counted. Or we have a new thing that we've started offering this year, which is ballot tracks, and you can sign up for notifications, and you can get text, et cetera, from us giving you similar information. And so we will have these kind of pushing out notifications from us, because we know a lot of people like to have that kind of communication. You're used to getting it when you order something from Amazon. And so we're trying to provide that same thing. The only thing we haven't figured out, Linda, is we'll have to give you a little map. We're watching the little car drive around with your ballot, but that'll be probably next in the future, right? So everything short of that, right? So
yes, your site is an amazing, helpful site. So if you're not already familiar with SarasotaVotes.gov, I highly recommend that you become familiar.
There's a lot of great information. The other thing is follow us on Facebook or Twitter, Sarasota County Supervisor of Elections. We have official Twitter channels and Facebook channels, and we're posting information there every day that you may find useful or you may want to share with your friends and things. So I would encourage you to follow us on social media, right? Because if it didn't happen on Facebook, it didn't really happen. So, we're not on TikTok or anything yet, but, we'll work on that. Some of the other supervisors are, they're a little cooler than I am, but I'm not that far yet. So.
Thank you. We think you're pretty cool. So that's fine. Question came in from Debbie. Are poll workers protected from challenging bystanders?
Are poll workers protected from being challenged by bystanders? I'm trying to understand the question.
I think unless Debbie chimes in and.
Debbie, do you want to chime in? I see you, Debbie. Hello.
I'm just wondering if they're protected from anybody that could get violent. Is there security for them to make sure they're safe?
So yes, obviously we want everyone to feel safe, whether it's voters or poll workers. And so let's talk about security and law enforcement and those sorts of things at the polls and early voting sites. So one thing Florida law provides for is a poll deputy, and you've seen them, but you wouldn't know that they're really there. They're a poll worker who is recruited by the Supervisor of Elections and paid by me, because poll workers are paid, or early voting workers are paid, not huge sums, but we don't take volunteers. So people have to be on they have to work for us. And so we have those individuals there, and there are really there on behalf of the sheriff to try to maintain order. Those are the only people allowed within, that are law enforcement, that are allowed within the 150 feet at the polling locations. Now, they're not sworn law enforcement officers like they are really part of our kind of poll worker team. It is about, and so the law allows us to work with that individual or poll workers to maintain whatever order within the 150 feet zone outside of a polling location, because there's no solicitation within that 150 feet or within inside those facilities. Now, it is a balance, because elections are run by civilians in Florida, like me, right? Law enforcement is only allowed to come into those sites if they're there to vote. That is it, unless we invite them in. The sheriff or municipal police are not allowed in those locations. So we have to invite them in. I do talk to Sheriff Hoffman frequently. I do provide information to the municipal law enforcement officials about early voting dates and times and locations. Same way with our polling locations. We do the same with Florida Power and Light and other things. So we're coordinating with people that need to know, but we're trying to find a balance between making sure that our voters are secure, our workers are secure, that no one feels, say, intimidated by someone that is there in uniform. And so that is an interesting balance, Debbie, to try to maintain. And again, we want to make sure, because you've asked a question about security, and then I have other voters who have concerns about seeing uniformed law enforcement at polling locations. And so again, we're trying to maintain that balance and train our poll workers on what they need to do to maintain security for themselves. Certainly, if they have an issue, they know to call 911. Don't call Ron Turner. Don't wait. I mean, get help. They can certainly call for that assistance. But this is an interesting question, and we are doing everything we can on all sides. But it is a delicate balancing. I saw Nick Walinda one time at an event, and I said, I kind of feel like you, Nick, walking as Supervisor of Elections, walking a tightrope over a volcano on broken eggshells on the tightrope. So it is a little bit of a balancing act on all of these. So I don't know that fully answered your question, but we're doing the best that we can. And I do take it seriously, security for everyone. But as I've told people, it's like, if you're outside the 150 feet or even inside, if you need help, call 911. Do not wait to call Ron Turner. So.
Thank you. You have once again just given us a little bit of a glimpse of your, super job that you have to do. We do have a couple more questions. One is, are you able to retrieve your ballot, your paper ballot, once in the box if you feel you've made an error?
No, you can't, because as I said, one of the things that made Florida successful in the 2020 election, a couple of things, let's say. One is the election wasn't close in Florida. So let's just be honest about that, right? A 3% top of the ticket margin in Florida in modern history is not a close election. because for the last, going back a number of years, they've been about a margin difference at the top of the ticket, about 1.5% or less, right? So that's not a close election in the state of Florida. The other thing is that we were able to process and open and tabulate these vote by mail ballots. So by the time we got to 7 o'clock on election night, 99.9% of our vote by mail ballots were done. Now we do have some stragglers, because imagine this. Well, first of all, we need your vote by mail ballots. Domestic vote by mail ballots have to be in by 7 p.m. Postmarks don't work for vote by mail, the domestic vote by mail ballots. Some people come running through the door at 6:59 p.m. with ballot in hand. And so we take those, but they can do that in Northport, Venice, or downtown Sarasota. Those that came in at 7 o'clock in Northport have to get to downtown Sarasota, and then we have to check their signature, do all of that, tabulate it. So we still have a few left of those. In November 2020, most of them, again, were done. The results were done by 7 p.m., but it took us until about midnight, the canvassing board, to finish the last few handfuls of ballots that we had, because every vote counts. And so the point with all that is, the law says when I have it, the ballot's cast. It's just like putting it in the tabulator. But the other reason for that is just for what I'm describing here is one of the reasons Florida was successful is because we're not like a state where you can come get it and do all of that. Because if you had to wait till election day to try to figure all that out, you're not going to have timely election results. And I think timely election results, not only is it the law, but it's important for us to know who won. And it also engenders confidence, I think, in the process, the timeliness of results do. So we do the best we can, and that makes sense.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I'll just wait for Linda to wrap it up. And thank you.
No, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Anne has her hand
I
up.
always have a question. Regarding working at the polls, I thought, gosh, it'd be good to help out and work at the polls. But does it have to be 14-hour days? Is there any other thing you can
Yeah,
do?
and it does, because there's a few different situations with that. One, we do have other temporary positions in our office where we can do scheduling with you, like during early voting or other temp positions. If you wanted to work with us, we could probably work a smaller shift. Election day, we have chain of custody issues from opening the polling place to the end of the day. Plus, I can tell you from a practicality standpoint, with that many poll workers, it's already difficult enough for us to do temp workers who want shifts. But if you had poll workers who were doing shifts and then decided that they couldn't show up, honestly, it would be a little bit of a challenge, and that is a kind word to use. It would really be a nightmare to try to schedule all of that, because I can tell you people would just have some issue and they wouldn't be able to work, and we'd have to try to figure that out and cover it. And it's just too, we can't do it. It's just too much for us. But we do have that if you want to do that in temporary positions with us in the office and other things, early voting, vote by mail areas. We can do smaller shifts for that.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Now,
Thank
thank all
you.
of you.
Yes, we are. Together, we make the world a better place. So please be an informed voter. Do cast your vote. There are multiple ways you can do that. There are multiple times you can do that. There is no rush. So be informed, make your choices, and vote. And help your friends and family that are in Sarasota County to do the same. And of course, encourage them wherever they live to be voters. It matters. It truly does. Ron, on behalf of all of us, thank you so very much for being here today.
Thank you for the invitation, Lynn, and thank all of you for what you do, and thank you for allowing me to do this work for you. I love it, and it's important work, and we have a great team of permanent staff, temporary staff, and poll workers and voters in our county who make it a pleasure and a privilege to do this. So thank you so much for letting me do it.
Well, you are welcome. We thank you. And we are in a mutual admiration position. and we're all gonna get out and vote.
Go vote. Woo.
Yes, thank you, Ron. Goodbye, y'all.
Goodbye. Have a great day.
Wish you the same.